Hello, sixth graders. Here is another math lesson for you. Lesson 75. In this lesson, we are going to be learning about writing fractions and decimals as percents. And this is part 1. What we need to know to begin with is that a percent, when we're talking about a percent of something, it is simply a fraction with a denominator of 100. That's our key. As long as we can get a fraction with a denominator of 100, we basically have a percent. Instead of writing it as a fraction, we simply substitute the percent sign for the denominator. So 3/100ths, this is a fraction that has 100 as the denominator. We simply change the denominator for a percent sign. So 3/100ths equals 3%. So any number I put there, let's say I have 45/100ths, that's going to be 45%, okay? That's really simple, right? Now we know it's not going to be that easy all the time. So let's take a look at something we might see. We might get something like write 3/10 as a percent. Well, we can't work with 3/10 to make it a percent. We need to have a fraction with a denominator of 100. So our hint is to make an equivalent fraction. Remember what an equivalent fraction is. That is a fraction that has the same value. Let's just look, for example, 1/2 and 2/4 are equivalent fractions. 4/8, these are all equivalent fractions. It's the same value, right? They're all 1/2, but they can have different denominators and different numbers. So what do we need to do to 3/10 to get a fraction that has 100 as the denominator? Well, all we need to do to a fraction to do this is multiply it by 1. So what that means is we can look at this and say, what do I multiply? Well, I guess I should do this. What do I multiply 10 by to get 100? Well, I multiply it by 10. So let's do this. We're going to multiply the same at the top. I'm multiplying this fraction by 10/10, which is in essence multiplying it by 1. So I'm going to get 30/100ths. That is an equivalent fraction. If we were to reduce this backwards, we would reduce 30/100ths down to 3/10. But once we get it to a fraction with a denominator of 100, we simply change the denominator for a percent sign. Okay, easy enough. Now, especially with that number. Let's take a look at a word problem. Of the 30 students who took the test, 15 earned an A. What percent of the students earned an A? Okay, well, we have to first get our ratio here. 15 of the 30 students earned an A. Well, remember, I need a fraction with a denominator of 100, and that's going to be kind of tricky, right? Because I can't multiply 30 by anything, even, to get 100, and I don't want to start dealing with more fractions or decimal numbers. So what I can do instead of going right to this step is I can reduce 15/30ths. Let me erase this here because I'm going to skip this part. So I can reduce this. Well, 15 is like what? 15 times 1. I'm sure you can do this in your head. Whoops. And 30 would be 15 times 2. I get rid of those because that's essentially 1. I end up with 1/2, right? 15/30ths is the same as 1/2. Now, can I make this into a fraction that has 100 as the denominator? Yes. What do I do to the 2 to get to 100? I multiply it by 50. So I do the same to the top. So I end up with 50/100ths, and when it's over 100, I have a percent. All right, so let's look at writing a decimal number as a percent. Well, we've been talking about fractions with 100 as the denominator. Well, we know this is what, 12/100ths. How would we write that as a fraction? Like this. So writing this number as a percent is that easy. We got to be a little bit careful. I have these two as examples because we want to look at this. Writing 8 as a percent, we'll write that as a fraction first. That is 8 over 100, right? So this one is 8%. We get down to this one, write 0.8 as a percent. 0.8 represents what? 8/10. Well, I need to get this over a fraction over 100. So what did I do to 10? I multiplied it by 10. So I'm going to do the same thing to the 8. That would be 80%. All right, a couple more examples. Write as a percent. This one's easy enough. Remember, fraction over 100, we simply replace the denominator with a percent sign. 4/5, this one we need to get to a fraction over 100. So what do? What am I going to multiply the top and the bottom by to get to 100? 5 times what would give me 100? 5 times 20. So I multiply the top by the same, 80. 80%. Okay. Let's just take a look at this one again. 4/5, there'd be, there's sometimes a couple different ways you can look at this. If we can get this over 10, multiplied this by 2, we could immediately get 8/10, and then we would know we can just multiply each by 10. Same thing. Hopefully that made some sense. So hard when I have to do this without having you here in front of me. Okay, here's another word problem. 12 of the 30 students earned a B on the test. What percent of the students earned a B? So we're working with a fraction, 12 out of 30. Now we dealt with 30 before as the denominator, and we needed to get it to 100. So what we did the last time was we simplified this. So let's simplify this. 12 is like 3 times 4. 30 is like 3 times 10. My 3's cancel out because that's 1, right? So my reduced form of that fraction is 4/10. 4/10 equals what fraction, or what numerator over 100? Well, we just multiplied the bottom by 10. We're going to do the same to the top. Okay. Now, I did want to just tell you one other thing about this. One of the previous lessons recently told us how to get a decimal number out of a fraction. And in that lesson, we talked about the fact that the fraction bar is like a dividing sign, okay? So what we have here, 12/30 would be 12 divided by 30, right? That's what that fraction bar represents. And that's going to get us into a decimal number. I'm going to move that up. 30 goes into 120 4 times. So if I take this decimal number equals 4/10, oh, see what we did here? We got the same thing. So if you get a really complicated fraction at some point and you're trying to get it into a percent, that is what you can do with division. So I want to just make this into something that's useful for you. When you get an assignment back, if I ever give you, well, 8 out of 10, and you want to know what the percent is, be like 80 over 100, that's 80%. But if we had 30 questions on a quiz, and you got, 28 of them right, could you figure out the percentage on your own? Absolutely. You're going to take 28, you're going to divide it by 30, and whatever your answer is going to be, should we do this one? 30 would go into 28. Oh my gosh, I should have planned this out ahead of time here. 9 times 30 would be 270. I don't know if this is going to end up equal here. And then 30 goes into 100 3 times. So you would be averaging, I'm not going to work this out completely. I should have taken an example to be a little bit more equal there to an even number. But you can get an idea of what your percent is. Okay, if I were you, I would, grab a calculator when you get those assignments back. What? Your math teacher just told you that? Yes, she did. All right. So basically, that's the whole lesson. Whenever you get a number. Now, I don't want to confuse you with this grade part at the bottom. So if you're finding that confusing, then just, let's just, oops, see what's happening here. Let's just ignore that piece. But what we want to remember is that you want to get your fraction over the denominator of 100. So your assignment is to do the practice set on page 392, A through N. You do not have to do letter G because that's one of the examples that I used for you here. So A through N, and you're going to figure those out and then go on Edmodo, enter your answers, and you should be able to see your grade right away. Make sure that you use the percent sign when you are asked to write something as a percent if you need to write it out, because Edmodo, I'll have it set for that. So you'll be, if you don't include that on your answer and it requires it, it would not be right. All right, I hope you have success with this. And if you have any questions, please get a hold of me.